Lynn is...
This is September 26, 2015. We're in Lower Waterford, and David Morrison is going to conduct a historical tour.
That house and that house, but that house looks different now. This is Lynn Troy. She's part of the history group. Craig Brown. These are the McMahons. Beth Cannell. Reintroduce yourselves. They're on the Hastings place. Levy. They're on the big round barn that Helen Pike had on the town report 2 or 3 years back. And you?
I'm Don. I'm from away.
Okay, you're welcome. This is the place to be. It was a wonderful place to grow up. Okay, I want to start with the big photograph inside, because that thing is precious to me. It is a Winston Pody photograph that has been artist enhanced, if you will. And this used to be in what they call the Waterford room at the St. Johnsbury House when it was a hotel. It's the senior housing now. And I had seen it as a kid in that room, but for it to show up here was really great. So the trick for me was noticing all kinds of things, but trying to date it. And this is how I arrived at the early 50s. The front of, well, across the street, we'll talk about when we're outside, is an empty lot right across the town road here. And when I was up to 4 years old, there was what we call the Houghton House was there, and it burnt when I was 4 years old, and I was down in the little brown house between the church and the library. And so that's all been cleaned off and turned into lawn. So it's post 50, maybe even 51, because it must have taken them some time to clean that up. But on the other end, the library hasn't been remodeled yet. You can see where you normally walk onto the upstairs porch there is a door. So whenever the Davies, and I'm a little fuzzy on whether it was 54 or 55, that the Davies daughters remodeled this whole building and gave it to the town as a library. And if it ever should stop being a library, it reverts to the Davies family, who I'm sure have descendants still alive and well somewhere. And another thing that dates it like before 55 is from 20 to 44, my grandmother had the post office in the L, or I call it L, the end of the little brown building. And she died, mother had it till 46, and then it went up the road a little ways, and then it came back in 55. But the sign is not there on the end of the building, so we know it's pre-55. So it's somewhere, she lives in a little gray house when you're heading for New Hampshire on the left, but she grew up in that farm there, and one or two of her sons were playing with matches in the barn, and I don't know when that would have been, in the 70s maybe. Right in the middle here, across the river, this is 18 going across the Connecticut. There's 2 sawmills here, and I can't remember if it was Chapman or Chaplin, but Andy Polson, many of you are familiar with Polson's store. Now it has a different name across the river there, but Andy managed those mills. This is in at least in the 40s. But that all came to its demise when they started building the dam. But Dad worked there as tally man. Stuff coming off the board saw, you got to figure out how many board feet are in it and tally it on a board. The church had just a long wooden step, if you will, basically the whole width. It wasn't until later that they put the cement steps as they are now on there. There's a couple cars sitting there. If anybody has really good eyes and are good at old cars, you could probably date the old cars. And as you can see, the land is so much more open. That's what the sign looks very much like the sign we've got now, and it shows the door where the porch is now, just as an open walk-in. And as near as I can figure out, that would say Waterford Free Library. And when the Davies family dedicated it to the town, of course, it became the Davies Memorial Library. Um,
Can we pass that around?
Sure. Yep, that's a good idea, Beth. Okay. You help me out as much as you can here.
Yes, sir.
This is not my forte, doing this kind of thing. My grandparents lived in that house. They bought it in 1900 even, and we had it in the family 103 years.
Which house?
The little brown one between the church and the library, when we get to walking, it's now a big yellow house, but that's very recent. My grandfather was a blacksmith by trade, but in his early 40s he had polio, and he rehabilitated himself and continued doing blacksmith work. But he did a lot of models. That's that was lit at one time. That had been in Fairbanks Museum since the early 50s as a loan, and we magically got it back. This is Grandpa's conception of the bridge across the Connecticut, right down here. If you went down this, what's now called Maple Street, far enough, you come to the Connecticut River, and of course it was unflooded back then. And both the Upper Waterford and Lower Waterford bridges went out in 1890. And this is not a scale model, it's just a conception of how it would have looked. It's a two arch covered bridge. Don't have too many of those around. The one down the Bath is my favorite to ride through, because that's got multiple arches in it. But anyway, what's amazing about Grandpa is not what he did, but the fact that he self-rehabilitated himself. They didn't have PT and even cars when this happened, so the family didn't have a car. So he did it all himself, and he managed to make a lot of nice furniture and other things in his second 40-some years in the wheelchair. Okay, I think we'll start by walking down. Well, let's go over and do the church. I didn't know how many people to expect here, but the church wanted to be sure you knew a little of their history. So I got 10 of these, and this was actually.
I have one.
This is actually out of a town report. I just folded it over. This is my wife, Heidi, by the way. You got one, okay. Couple for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this. We will walk over into the church here and look around for a second. When we walk down Maple Street here, I'll hand this one around too. This picture is got to be over 100 years old. This is, right here is the barn. I'll hand this around too. But this building had a barn. And there's a house down here that looks very much like the one that's there, but it's not the same one. Dad tore that one down in early 40s. Also down here was the parsonage for this church. And the last line of that little write-up there talks about it being open continuously except during hard times of lack of interest and financial hard times. And I guess they really did have a heyday to have their own parsonage. We'll talk about that more when we get down there. Also further down here is a house on the left. It was Goss was a big name. All this nice little lawn out at the end here was stuff that came out when there's another level below this, and for the furnace and storage and stuff. And so when they very low attendance, and it takes a lot to maintain a building like that. So she did this as a kind of like a fundraiser for the church. So if any of you have lost a relative that you'd like to spend either $1 or $200, depending on the size of those bricks, as a support for the maintenance fund of the church, just contact Kate. I think she raised about $3,500 with what she did there so far, and we're right in the center there. But she keeps updating the flowers with whatever's going to grow at any particular time of year. So she does a good job. There's been a number of things, and it's
Bye-house, B-E-Y-E.
B-E-Y-E. There's two books, if you really get interested in Waterford. The one about Upper Waterford is A Village Lost to Progress by Gordon Hopper. Distant relation in a way, but I couldn't think of his name. And then Dr. Harris's book. The original is a soft cover. David Warden and Barnett did a reprinting a few years ago, and I guess he still has them for sale, doesn't he?
I do. I have.
Oh, you
10
have
more
some.
copies now.
Okay. Does he have even more than that, or is it kind of...
I'm sort of prying them loose month to month, but I have 10 more
okay.
available, so.
Yeah, well, it's a treasure. He writes it very much in an old-fashioned writing. I've never read the thing from cover to cover all at once. It's just like a reference book to me, but that's a resource. And the library has a copy of both of those to check out.